Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to go through this quite quickly. Earlier on, we talked a little bit about the whole point about people having conversations about energy. And we came to this project. There's quite a tradition around people that undertake social network analysis, which says that the conversations and the relationships that we have with our everyday people, our families and our friends, are actually just as influential as our income or our gender or any of those other factors. And social network analysts sort of look to try and identify how people communicate through their social networks and what influence that has on all sorts of other factors to do with their lives. Bernie Hogan, who is added to the team of Joe, myself and Ruth, was somebody who's a specialist in social network analysis. So we brought him on because he's done this type of work in lots of other areas, and very helpful he was too in helping us design the surveys and everything else. So we hypothesised, we thought that these personal networks would be really important in terms of ways that people received energy messages, who they got them from, how they got them would matter in terms of their energy behaviours, and that this is a way to think about the world, and it's a form of political power, as Nørgaard suggests here. How do people actually talk about energy? So much of the work that's already done on social network analysis focus on this idea that it's a very supportive thing. Your social network supports you in thinking in a sort of positively ways. It makes good neighbourhoods. It does that sort of thing. And the information can be diffused through these social networks. So I tell you, you tell your friends or your brother or your sister or whatever. And that was the sort of premise. If one person knows about how to change their energy, will they communicate it to other people? Will there be a sort of ripple effect? But actually, some people do caution also that social networks can be the opposite effect, and that maybe, depending on who's in your social network, they can cause elites and they can actually cause exclusion. So we're trying to look out for both of those things. And we recognise that the local carbon communities were in of themselves, had people in them that had their own personal social networks as well. So they would be promulgating this idea of energy messages. And they may be within a community, some of the people that were doing the most talking about energy. And they were also talking to each other. So as part of the interviews, and they nearly crucified me, the people that were doing the interviews, when I showed them that this is what they had to do, we got people as part of the interviews to say who were all their friends in their personal network, and they did this using some name generator thing. And then we gave them this sheet, I say we loosely because I wasn't there, they were doing it for me, to sort of collect who was close to them, and they would name them and they would place them. And close didn't just mean like in their neighbourhood, it meant close in terms of emotional closeness. So if people were very close, you placed them very close to you, and you gave them a name and a gender and all those other things. And if they were somewhat close, you placed them further away. And if they were not very close, you placed them further away. And only then did we ask them, and so who do you talk about energy with? Or who talks to you about energy in those networks? And then we got them to put a little green spot on it if they did this. How long did this take, Laura? About half an hour? More or less. So you can imagine they loved me in the middle of this sort of household interview that was already about 2.5 hours long to have to be doing this. But actually, I think people find it quite good fun. And it was something that broke up the interviews in a way. So that was quite good. And so we looked at that, and we had 86 interviews out of all of the households. So out of the 90 households, there were 86 that actually did this for us in one way or another, some of them longer, some of them shorter. And we recorded not only this, but actually then went and asked them, so what did you talk about with that person? Who said what to who and how this? And we recorded all of that, fortunately, with the aid of a tape recorder. And actually, what we found out was that people tended to have more conversations about energy with people that were somewhat close to them than very close to them. No, the other way around, very close to them. So their family and friends rather than people that were further away. So you could sort of imagine that it would be like, well, I'll show you in a bit, but you could sort of imagine what those conversations might be. Switch your light off, shut the door. And that people with more network members tended to discuss just as much. You know, it didn't matter if you had a small network with just a few family and friends around you or a bigger one. It was pretty much the same. There wasn't much and there wasn't much indifference in terms of the amount of people who thought they could communicate energy and those that were asking for advice either. And actually, you see, look, what they were most talking about was things to do with stuff to do with the boilers and practical things, you know. And then they were talking about their bills. So you could imagine it like, oh, the bill's gone up again. You know, those sorts of conversations that are very every day. Some people were talking, though, about the actual low-carbon and zero-carbon technologies, and so that would suggest that there was something going on in there about, you know, new things that were coming to them in their households. These are the same households that Rajat's been talking about, the carbon mapping households, exactly the same households. So, you know, some of this influence of our research and what's happening within their communities and the low-carbon technologies that are going into their communities are generating conversations. And something was about information, and right on the end we do actually have some people within that group that were talking about global warming and the environment and wider things as well. And Joe's really helpfully stuck some really nice little quotes up there, which I won't read in the interest of time. And that actually, the interviews mentioned that they'd influenced the behaviour of other people, and that particularly in Blacon, interestingly. And one of the things that we noticed in Blacon was that the Blacon group was particularly more around sort of not trying to radicalise people to be environmentalists, but very much around cost savings and sort of practical things that people could do, and that maybe actually this was a way that you could actually get more information, and there was maybe less judgment going on. Because actually, what we also found was that there was such a thing as sort of energy stigmatising, or that people feeling either that they self-stigmatise, oh, I don't dare talk about energy and energy behaviours because people will think I'm banging on about it. And here come the energy police was one of the quotes that we had. Watch out, here they come. And so that some people felt that there was a sort of idea that if you were really enthusiastic about energy behaviours and reducing your energy behaviours, that you might be seen to be a bit of a geek or a bit of a tree hugger or all that sort of thing. So we do still have these stigmas around these types of conversations, and people feeling that they were places where they just wouldn't talk about energy, that it would be inappropriate. So I think this goes back to the sort of idea about these community events, because in these community events, people didn't. There were 2,000 people in total, more than, who were at these community events who happily and openly discussed things to do with the environment, with energy. And believe me, they weren't all activists and greenies. I mean, the school that you went to in Easterside, right there, it was just the parents of the kids that had done a play. And the play started to get people to talk about thinking about the environment and then thinking about the ice melting and the kids all dressed up as penguins. It was just so cool. So, you know, it's just like, you know, they weren't these activists at all, and you can, but maybe it's better to have, and so this would be the advice that I would say is that, you know, actually by having a whole community doing something, it's better than having an individual, because individuals, when you're communicating your energy messages, you're mostly only doing it to your family in your own home. And actually, there's all these other things about stigma and everything else going on that you don't dare to talk to your neighbours. But actually, if you're in the middle of your school and the kids are doing a play, well, then maybe that's a fine place and you feel comfortable. So very much about where you communicate these things, and that there is this sort of neutral ground where you can do it and not. And this is just to sort of think about the ego is the person that we interviewed, and these people are called alters, the people that they communicate to. And this was just like what topics people consult about and what topics the person asks about. Yeah, so that sort of, and basically it was a sort of pretty much the sort of that you can see that they're actually consulting about general things, but topics that they're consulting about are things to do with more to do with the efficiency side of things. So it's quite an interesting, although there's about an even balance, there's a difference in what they talk about. So just I think, I don't want to go on and on because, you know, I'm trying to catch up, but, you know, the energy behaviours are not neutral things, that the personal is political with energy. In actual fact, people do think that they're going to be judged, and they do need a neutral space to do these things. And perhaps it's easier when something's new. So if you've got PV on your roof, then you'll talk about it. But after a while, that sort of wears out. So you've got to find ways to make it novel. Maybe cost savings is a good way to think about it. It's about knowing how to frame those conversations and making people have the, well, we're talking about energy buddies instead of, sort of energy police, energy buddies who can navigate you through, and that energy is linked to larger issues which also need to be thought about, like climate change was a really good thing to frame those things in sometimes, or cost, or food. The food project in Kirklees worked really well for some people to be able to talk about that, even though they had other cultural barriers that they would perhaps not normally think about doing that. So we need to create the spaces and the places where people can do this. And LCCs act as this sort of boundary, a way to get over those boundaries and to break those boundaries down and bring people together. And the events that they organise can make these neutral spaces. But on the contradiction side, they could also be seen as this sort of green police. So watch out, if they get labelled as that, if they feel like you're knocking on the door, then they become like the Jehovah's Witnesses. You close the door, you close your curtains when they're coming. Okay, thanks a lot.